Good evening and welcome to a special live stream presentation brought to you by Grand Canyon National Park, Grand Canyon Conservancy, and Lowell Observatory. My name is Kevin Schindler, and I'm the Historian and Public Information Officer at Lowell Observatory. And joining me tonight is the incomparable dark sky ranger at Grand Canyon National Park, Rader Lane, who's a legend at the canyon. And we're really pleased to be able to talk with you tonight, Rader. Thanks for joining us.
You're too kind, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. It's a really honor to be here.
Well, this is great because it's such a great time to talk about astronomy because between all our groups, because you have a little get together coming up in just a couple weeks. That's the Grand Canyon Star Party, which is just a fabulous event. So we're going to talk about that tonight. We'll talk about dark skies because the connection with Grand Canyon National Park as a dark skies park. And so we're going to talk about a lot of different things. Also behind the scenes tonight, Gavin Moriarty is at Lowell Observatory, operating one of our telescopes at the Giovanni Open Deck Observatory. And throughout the night, we'll share some eye candy. It's a little bit cloudy there tonight, but we know the moon is shining. We'll look at that and some other things as the sky allows. So really nice night to talk astronomy and just to talk about Grand Canyon and Lowell Observatory and our connections. So let's talk a little bit about that thing coming up, that star party that you're really involved with, the Grand Canyon Star Party. When is it, and what's the big deal?
Yeah, well, this year it's June 1st through the 8th. It's an 8-night event, and it's a celebration of dark skies, like you were saying. I mean, we invite over 100 volunteer astronomers who bring up their telescopes and their expertise and donate their time to share the wonders of the universe at one of the darkest night skies in the United States. So on any given evening, we'll have between 50 and 60 telescopes set up behind Grand Canyon Visitor Center. We'll have a twilight talk at the beginning of the evening. A special guest speaker gives usually a PowerPoint presentation. So we'll have 8 of those, and then everybody sort of migrates to the back of the telescope lot, or back of the visitor center, and there's just tons of telescopes out there. We have 3 laser guided constellation programs we give every night. There's night sky photography workshops. During the day we have solar viewing. We have educational presentations that go on. So it's just an awesome event, and we're in our 34th year. We started. Well, this is really the second iteration of Grand Canyon Star Party. The second iteration started back in 1991. Started at the Yavapai Geology Museum by a man named Dean Kettleson, who had attended every single year until this last year, 2023. Unfortunately, he passed away in August of 2023, and so we're sort of dedicating this year's Star Party to him, and we're gonna miss him dearly, but he will be there in spirit. I've been telling people there's going to be one extra star in the sky at least this year, and he started this event back in 1991, and it's just been growing and growing ever since. And really, it has grown to be one of the largest night sky festivals in the National Park Service. And I think one of the main reasons, and it sort of spills over into some of the other reasons why Grand Canyon is so unique, is that there's really few places, I think, in the country that have as much infrastructure and accessibility whilst maintaining pristine dark skies. So usually you'll have one or the other, right? You're usually in you're in Las Vegas, and there's tons of hotels, but you can see literally 6 stars, and 2 of them are probably airplanes, and then on the converse, now on the flip side, you have pristine skies like Big Bend or somewhere like there, but very few places to stay, and it's sort of hard to get to. And so Grand Canyon is really in this unique situation where we just have tons of hotels and campgrounds and places to stay, but we're still maintaining some of the darkest night skies in the United States, and so that combination has really led to this event becoming the size that it is, and just as renowned as it is amongst the astronomy community, the amateur astronomy community, even the professional astronomy community.
And how long have you been involved with it?
Well, I started back here in Grand Canyon.
Not 34 years.
And I started in 2010 at Grand Canyon. And my first summer here, one of my jobs was to, the event was at Yavapai Geology Museum at the time. And back then it was before our big theater was built here on the rim of the canyon at the new visitor center. And, so we had a little projector screen that we would erect every night for the twilight talk. And one of my first jobs was to hold tight that projector screen as it was sort of near the edge of the canyon, hold it as the wind sort of tried to blow it over the side of the canyon. Me and one other sort of beginning rangers. And, that experience, sort of crazy as it was, drew me back to the canyon year after year. And I sort of walked around and took notes behind the rangers that were working the event. And about 2016, I had the opportunity to start coordinating the event. So this will be probably my 8th year going on. So yeah, pretty amazing.
Well, you passed that first test, and clearly you succeeded. So, and while we're chatting, Gavin, I don't see the screen actually, but Gavin just mentioned that he's got Misar and Alor. If you on a dark night, if you look up at the Big Dipper, the middle star of the handle, if you look closely, it's actually, well, depending on your eyesight, you can just barely make out a second star. They're real close together, Misar and Alor. In the old days, it was a sign of eyesight. You could see both those stars. Your eyesight was good enough to go off to war in some culture. So there's a little bit of cultural history. But if you look at those under the big telescope, you see that's even more than 2 stars. Our eyes are pretty good tools, but nothing like telescopes. You see so much more detail.
Yeah, it's one of the wonderful things about this system here, Misar and Alor, and it's something I love talking about up at the canyon, because indeed you can really, pretty easily make out that visual binary system from the Grand Canyon, and like you said, it's a really beautiful system because it allows you to see the visual binary, so you can see that physically with your naked eye those 2 stars. And then, like you said, as you zoom in a little bit more, you can actually make out the telescopic binary. And then I think, as you were saying there, it's this system, I believe, you can go even a little bit deeper, and you have to start analyzing the light coming off of these stars to be able to split them up, and it's what we call a spectroscopic binary. And so you kind of got the tier of different types of binaries in that one system. And you also mentioned the historical aspect of it. This is just a great example again of the you can look at a lot of these objects in the night sky through various lenses. I always like to think of it that way. So if you're feeling a little bit more historical, and in that way you can look at it. Indeed, it's like, yeah, this was used as a test of eyesight. I've always heard it was for archers or commanders, in the Persian armies and things like this. But then you can also look at it through science as well, and look at it through the history of science, and make out those things. So it's just a joy to be able to look at these things through all these various lenses.
It is, and I think it's interesting because when you look
and make
at a
out
star,
those things, so
whether it's through your naked eye or with binoculars or a big telescope, you're pretty much seeing a point of light. And at some point you say, oh, that's not very exciting. But then when you think about it, think about some of the stuff you're talking about, or like there's another binary star, or Albireo, which is not up in the sky to view yet, but it's really got a nice color differentiation, kind of a reddish and then a bluish. And yeah, you're just looking at 2 dots, but when you think about what that means, the colors and the temperatures and the sizes and the distances, and proximity to each other, I mean, just those two dots tell so much story. And that's what looking at the sky is. Every time you look up, there's a story that you're unveiling. And so I think it even if it's quote unquote just a star, just a couple stars, it's still there's still a lot behind it to learn and to find interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is that part of our awe and appreciation for the night sky is grounded in that cultural context. You know, like you said, it's just a couple of dots in the sky, but when you connect them all together and you start thinking about these histories, I mean, it's the greatest. I like to think of it as the sort of the greatest ink blot test humanity's ever known. You know, it's like
Yeah,
every culture has looked at the same exact set of stars and we've
right.
interpreted them in myriad ways. And the fact that we're able to look through that and reflect upon it today is such an awesome thing.
And I think that's one of the things I like about star parties and certainly the Grand Canyon Star Party, because we live in an area where every direction you look, there's a different cultural identity or multiple cultures, and different cultures have different stories about the night sky and
Mhm.
interpretations of what it means. And so you look, we see the North Star. Some Navajo groups see the home fire or
Right,
and so the Big Dipper, depending on what culture, England it's the plow, China maybe a dragon, um, Native American groups, like going back to Iroquois, it was a type of bear. It's been
right.
interpreted as different types of bear, different sizes of bear, so
Well,
it's fascinating.
it is fascinating, even what you said there, where I mean, we're looking again here at the Misar Alcor system in Ursa Major, or known as the Big Dipper in the Western Canon. But you were saying some cultures, even independent of themselves, oceans apart, would look at this constellation and call it a bear, for example. And that in itself, that sort of what I like to call comparative ethnoastronomy is a fascinating topic. There's certain constellations like this one here, like Scorpius, Orion. These ones tend to be sort of picked out as a scorpion or a hunter, for example, in cultures independent of themselves, and even that fact itself is fascinating. And like you said, for Grand Canyon, the Dene people, the Navajo, have a constellation canon that rivals in depth and beauty, the Western Greek canon. And as you said, here this Misor Alcor system found in what the Western canon would call Ursa Major, but to the Dene people, it's like you said, first revolving male, and
Yeah,
as we know, the Big Dipper Ursa Major is a circumpolar constellation that is sort of always, as you can see in my background here, everything's sort of revolving around the North Star, that central fire, as the Navajo call it. Well, the Big Dipper is doing that same thing, and you've got on one side first revolving male, and on the other side first revolving female, and they're sort of revolving around that central fire, and it's talking about the different aspects that, for example, a father figure and a mother figure can bring into a home environment. And it offers some pretty beautiful stories, especially when you compare them, for example, to some of the rougher stories that you find in the in the Greek world,
Greek,
especially
Roman,
of
yeah.
especially the origin of Ursa Major here, which is maybe not appropriate for this program, but it's very interesting to be able to compare it that way.
And it's really, example of, how people from the beginning have looked up at the sky and use the sky for different things, whether it was entertainment, um, explaining origins, um, relative timekeeping. If
Hmm.
Sirius is up in the morning, it's time to start thinking about planting the crops. Um,
Right.
Telling the time of season, a lot of different things. And I always like talking about how astronomy is still so embedded in our everyday lives. I mean, we think about time,
Yeah.
but the month, the day, the year are all based on astronomy. Even the time units we use, AM and PM, ante-meridian and post-meridian, defined, it's based on the position of the sun, whether it's before that imaginary line over your head, the meridian, or after it. And so astronomy is part of who we are, whether we think about that or not. And
Yes.
that's why I think like Grand Canyon Star Party is so great, because that's a place where multiple native cultures have connections. And so you can really talk about the rich variety of stories and interpretations in a place like the canyon because of all those different groups.
And we're really excited this year
Plus
to,
scientists, the
yeah,
science behind it.
absolutely. Yeah. And this year we're really excited to be welcoming back Autumn Giard. And she's representing the Paiute Indian tribe of Utah. And she's going to be kicking off the Star Party on June 1st as a special guest speaker, talking about the fascinating world of Paiute astronomy. And then later on in the week, we are welcoming Gerald Dewavendewa from he's an artist who lives down in Tucson nowadays, but he's from the Hopi tribe, and he recently wrote a book called Codex Tawa on Hopi cosmology, as told sort of through his beautiful artwork, and so those will be two fantastic talks to try to get to if people are local and can run up there.
That's what's so great about the Star Party. There's really something for everybody. I mean, the looking through the telescopes is truly a magical experience because you're in an incredibly dark area. You're on the rim of one of the most beautiful places on Earth that you see during the daytime. At nighttime, you look up and the richness of the sky. And I love it when you go outside and it takes a minute, even for seasoned stargazers. Sometimes it'll take a minute to
Yeah.
realize, wait a minute, where am I looking? Because the background star, there's so many background stars, you don't just have, like if you go to downtown Flagstaff, where Lowell Observatory is, dark skies, you can see the Milky Way from downtown Flagstaff. I mean,
Yeah.
80% of the world lives in a place where you can't see the Milky Way, and yet in downtown Flagstaff, you can see it. And yet, if you then go up to the north or to the south rim or north rim, you realize how much more dark it is. And you see all these background stars, and it can take a minute to get your bearings.
It is always a joy to see even like you say, seasoned astronomers sort of squirm a little bit here on the rim and find their way. It's awesome to see, and really profound what you're saying there. I mean, it is just the big constellations are awash in stars, and
Yes.
it's these type of faint objects too. Like I believe we're trained on the Beehive cluster
Yeah.
now. That
Open star
it's
cluster.
these open these faint fuzzies, and fainter objects that you can see with your naked eye really come out at places like the Grand Canyon. I mean, the Beehive here is located in an already pretty dim constellation, Cancer, and but you can see this wonderfully with your naked eye at the canyon. And it's really interesting to me to look at sort of the history of how the Grand Canyon's been interpreting these objects since we've been a park. And back in the early days, the ranger naturalists, they were one of the first products they were putting out was the so-called Grand Canyon Nature Notes. And in some of the earliest editions, 1928, there's a July 1928 edition that has one of the first attempts to interpret the night sky by then at the time, the superintendent Minor Tillotson. But he was looking at it, the title of it was something like Saturn as a brilliant object in the night sky. And, I reflect on some of those early writings that these early rangers were doing at the canyon. They were really focusing on the charismatic megafauna in the sky, if you will, the big planets and the moon and things like that. And I think the reason why is because, back in the 20s, the night sky was basically ubiquitous over all of the United States. And it wasn't that much of a novelty to be able to see the really to be able to exclaim that you've seen some of these faint fuzzy objects because everybody could. And it really wasn't until about the 1960s and the 70s when light pollution was coined, and we started to really see the gravity of our situation, that, as you alluded to earlier, most people in the United States can no longer see the Milky Way anymore from their homes, over 80% of people. And that is a terrible thing to think about. And one thing I always like to flag at when we say that as part of the dark skies movement, to alarm people to this, is, by the time the Milky Way disappears, there's actually a whole tier of objects that have long disappeared, way before even the Milky Way disappears. And things like the Beehive cluster here is one of those objects, just the most fragile celestial thing, phenomenon to see in the sky, that just disappears upon the faintest, thinnest veil of light pollution. And you can see it beautifully in places like Grand Canyon.
Right. And, those watching might, we heard the term open star cluster. There's also globular star cluster. These open star clusters, they're kind of, as the name says, they're a little bit more open. There's tens to a few thousand stars in these. Globular star clusters can have 500,000 stars, much more dense. And they're some of the beautiful things to look at. There's one with the romantic name M3.
Yeah.
There's, a lot of astronomy objects have numbers. The M, you hear a lot of M numbers. That refers to Charles Messier, the French astronomer who wanted to find comets. And every time he'd find a fuzzy blob in his little telescope, he'd identify its location and everything, study it closer. And when he realized that, okay, this is a comet, this one's not. So he made this catalog of annoying objects so that future scientists could know to ignore them because they're not comets. And as it turns out, this catalog he made it's the most used astronomy catalog of objects, 110 objects. And with modern telescopes, you can make them out as galaxies and clusters and nebulae, and it's just a rich variety of things. By studying the Messier catalog, I mean, you can go through stellar evolution, young stars, old stars, how they cluster over time. You can learn so much. But it's funny how science works sometimes. Okay, let's just ignore these the comets, vermin of the sky, as some have called it, comets and asteroids. A lot of people don't care about those. They're just icy blobs. But boy, look at all these galaxies you can see. That's pretty fun. But Grand Canyon is the place to be able to see that sort of thing. And looks like we're on now M3. This just a gorgeous open star cluster with, I don't know, some 500,000 stars or so in it. But you're talking about the dark skies and being able to see something fainter like the Crab Nebula. And the dark sky movement that you mentioned, started with astronomers who are trying to look at the night sky. And from the beginning of time until just 150 years ago or so, it was pretty straightforward. But as electric lighting became commonplace along the eastern seaboard in the United States, it started and then spread. The more artificial light shining up, the more or the less you can see of stars and such. And so astronomers for a long time saw this issue. Percival Lowell, in fact, was one of the first to act on it. He wanted to build his observatory, but decided to go to Arizona territory instead of his backyard in Boston because of the light pollution. And he set up shop in Arizona in Flagstaff, where there was not even any electricity at the time. It was in 1894, 18 years before Arizona was even a state. And so this dark sky, astronomers knew about it for years, but what I think is so fascinating is, we're centered on astronomy with the Star Party and Lowell and your dark sky efforts, but we now know that artificial light has such a negative impact on so many other things besides just the health and welfare of astronomers trying to look at the night sky. the biological consequences of artificial light on plants, animals, and including us humans. Is
Yeah.
profound.
Yeah, and we always use, you're talking about the Eastern Seaboard, and, everybody in the dark sky movement tends to use things like the sea turtles, who when they hatch on the beaches, they would tend to go towards the water naturally, because that would be the brightest part of the horizon line for them, because the stars and the moon would reflect on the water, and they would be naturally attracted to that. And now, with the advent of light pollution, big sky domes and cityscapes are shining brighter inland, and these sea turtles are turning inland and following the light pollution domes, and getting killed out in the wild there, run over by cars, things like that. And that's incredibly sad, and a terrible thing. But I think what you said as well. I mean, the what really concerns me are some of these larger scale phenological shifts, that you see, when it comes to light pollution. I mean, talking about, like, to the extent that light pollution affects birds and bird migrations and bugs, and how they're moving in large scales on landscapes, and breeding, and of disrupting that whole pattern and system of birds and insects. We're really just starting to learn about those impacts, and pretty alarming papers that are coming out.
Yeah.
But you're right. The biological impacts, the human impacts, the economic impacts. Something like, I think the last estimate I heard, it was like $3.5 billion a year. Over 30% of all commercial lighting in the United States, just, there's 30% of our light we just shoot straight up into the atmosphere, and does nothing to help us see better at night, and does
Right.
everything to block our view of amazing clusters, like you said, the beautifully named M3 here.
And then we're gonna go to a galaxy, Whirlpool Galaxy, which is just a classic thing to look at through. If you go to the star party, you can certainly see that through some of the telescopes. And
Yes.
it's really important to talk about that. Like you said, it goes beyond just astronomy. We're especially interested in that, but what we see it's doing to the ecosystem. But the good news is that light pollution is something that we, as both individuals and communities, can do something about, and do something pretty significant. And you're talking about how dark it is at the canyon, and even if you go to the canyon 15 years ago or 20 years ago, it's still pretty dark, but not as dark as it is now. And maybe, Rader, you can talk about some of the efforts you were involved with that led to the Grand Canyon being identified as Dark Sky Park, because it was dark before, but holy cow, is it dark now? And it's an example of what, whether you don't have to be a park, any community. Flagstaff led the effort. It was the first dark sky park. Flagstaff had the first outdoor lighting ordinance in the world, but you can do it anywhere. And so I think your example is so great of what can be done.
Well, yeah, I agree. The scale of Grand Canyon's process to become an international dark sky park is really unprecedented. As you say, Flagstaff was the world's first dark sky place, dark sky community, back in 2001. And then a few years after, Natural Bridges National Monument became the first dark sky park in southern Utah. But that was about that time that we, as Grand Canyon, started looking at retrofitting our lights and becoming an international dark sky park. But we were such a massive park that we knew it was going to be a huge ship to turn. So about 2013 or 14, Grand Canyon Conservancy got a huge surge of funding from a lot of really caring donors, the Joe Orr Family Foundation, and others. And we hired a lighting inventory specialist back in 2013, who went around the park and basically tallied all the exterior light fixtures in the park, and to her astonishment, from the South Rim to the North Rim, down to the bottom to Phantom Ranch, even out to the Lonely Ranger Station out at Tuweep, in the northwest part of the park, we inventoried 5,094 exterior fixtures. And so that is a ton of lights. About a third of those were already night sky friendly, which is good for us. But to become an international dark sky park, you had to initially show Dark Sky International, the entity that awards these certifications, that about 2/3 of your lights were dark sky friendly. So all told, we originally had to actively retrofit about 1,700 fixtures, just to become an international dark sky park back in 2019. The job isn't done from there, but you initially hit that benchmark. And Kevin, I know back in 2019, you came up and were representing Lowell Observatory up at the certification ceremony, which is really cool.
That was really cool. Yeah.
And but that was only the first step. We then had 5 years to become 90% compliant. That is to say 90% of our exterior fixtures had to be dark sky friendly. And by dark sky friendly, we basically mean just putting full shields on these fixtures, adding bulbs that have a little bit warmer looking tone. They're actually cooler when it comes to Kelvin, but more orange, amber looking bulbs. Or just putting them on timers or removing them altogether. So a bunch of criteria we use to designate them as night sky friendly. But we had 5 years to make 90% of the lights dark sky friendly from June 2019. So that brings us up to June 2024 in about 1 month. And I'm happy to report that in January of 2024, we surpassed the 90% benchmark mandate, reported it to Dark Sky International. They congratulated us, and we're actually going to be celebrating this 90% benchmark this year at Star Party on June 8th. Dark Sky International will be coming up and giving a talk at Star Party, but also acknowledging and presenting us with sort of a small token of appreciation and acknowledgement of the 90% milestone, which is just
congratulations. That's excellent.
Huge deal. Yeah, we're all super excited, and so you're right. It is far darker now because of those retrofit efforts, no doubt.
And it's fascinating to me, the timing of things and the foresight of you and others at the Grand Canyon to you had the Star Party, you had dark skies already, but let's make a dark sky park, and just how much you've done for astronomy. And then you started an astronomer in residence program. You had an artist in residence program, but you started astronomer in residence program. And it's just all of this came together, making Grand Canyon just a mecca for celebrating the night sky.
Well, and we're trying to ride the coattails of Lowell Observatory, because you guys are just doing amazing outreach as well, and so we are super inspired by everything that Lowell Observatory does down in Flagstaff, and it's just been an amazing partnership to build this program. But you're right, the astronomer in residence program is a very unique program in the national parks. We invite professional astronomers, researchers, dark sky advocates, even writers, artists, performing artists, musicians, and they come and they live at the park for a short residency, and they focus their discipline through the lens of dark skies and provide public presentations and work on creative projects and things like that in the park. And it's just been a wild success. We've had about 10 astronomers in residence so far. I'm happy to say that as of yesterday, the application process for the 2025 astronomers in residence is now open. And if you're interested in applying to come and live at the Grand Canyon in the Verkamps residence, one of the coolest places to possibly live for a month or a month and a half, and practice your discipline and share it with visitors of Grand Canyon. Go to grandcanyon.org and see what you can do, how you can apply to become an astronomer in residence. And and Kevin, if you have any advice for any prospective astronomers in residence, we'd love to hear it, because Kevin Schindler here was selected as so far as one of our first 10 astronomers in residence. He applied through it was a rigorous application process, a lot of amazing candidates. But as we all know, Kevin is a legend down in Flagstaff, and we were super honored to have him up here at Grand Canyon for
You're misusing
about
your
a
words a
month.
little bit.
And so how was that experience for you? And what would you say to any people trying to apply to the program?
Well, I think, I mean, the experience was life altering. I mean, going to the Grand Canyon day, night, any time of year is inspirational. Living there for a month is life altering. And like you said, to be able to, I mean, for me, my background at sometime back in the late Cretaceous or so when I went to college was geology and paleontology. And so my first trip to the Grand Canyon, I was in college, Marietta College in Ohio, and we did a geology trip. And I'm looking at, millions, billions of years laid down in time. You're looking back in time. It's a time machine. And now, I work in an observatory, I look up, and I'm doing the same thing. You're looking at light. That's a time machine. You're looking back in time. And to stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and one of the most magical times I had, and it was a year ago, it was May of 2023 that I was there, when we were out at Mather Point, and we set up some telescopes, and the moon was up a bit, and my project was tied in with the moon and the astronaut training that went on there in the 1960s in preparation for walking on the moon. And there was enough moonlight, the skies weren't as dark as when the moon isn't up, but the moon rays were glowing down into the park, and you could look down and see roughly where the astronauts had walked and trained in preparation for that thing up there.
Wow.
It was magical. So
wow.
I love the residency program because it combines sharing the excitement of the cosmos and whatever your specific area is with the public, and then doing some research. Whether it's, creating a different way of interpreting the sky with art, or whatever it might be. It's like a multidisciplinary approach to sharing the wonders of the universe. And I anybody interested in astronomy should apply for this. And I think some of the projects that people have done, and you can comment on these. It's just such a great variety of things. For mine, I spent a lot of time. Gosh, I gave set up telescopes during the day to look at the sun, during the night to look at whatever was up. One day it was kind of cloudy, but I set it up on a condor that was hanging out on site.
Oh, yeah.
And so you could look at it, you're looking through telescopes. It's cool. But then trying to locate the place where the astronauts, different stops they made, and think about what they were thinking. Some of them were saying, what am I doing at the bottom of this crater? I want to get up there in space.
Going the wrong way.
Yeah, what's this have to do with going to the moon? But so many of them were like all of us were inspired by the grandeur of the canyon, and it really helped them. As Alan Bean, who walked on Apollo 12, said, it's where he really got it. The connection, the grand scale of things, the antiquity of things. And to be at a place like Grand Canyon where you see, as Tyler Nordgren, the first astronomer in residence, said, half the park is after dark.
Yes.
Daytime, you look down, you're looking back at time at the layers upon layers of rocks. Nighttime, you look up at that light from stars and planets and nebulae. You're looking back
It
at
is.
that.
It is a play on deep time, and it's it's like you're indicating here. There's really no place else on nocturnal Earth where you can stand between so much deep time revealed beneath you in stone and above you in star, and
Yeah.
you're caught in the middle, and and then when you go down to Phantom Ranch to the very bottom like the astronauts did and look up, well, now you're looking up through more deep time than you
Yes. Yeah.
possibly can anywhere. And I like to imagine back in the 60s when they were down there, any of the geologists who were there, I like to imagine that they had the astronauts touch the basement rock at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and look up at the stars. And if you touch that 1.8, 1.74 billion year old schist at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and you transport yourself back to the time of its formation, and you look up, most of the stars in the sky disappear. And that is to say that that rock that you touch with your hand is older than many of the big bright stars that you're looking up at in the sky. And so these just ideas that you can toy with in your head when it comes to deep time becomes much more than toying once you really start to think about it for a while, and it truly becomes a transformative type of experience. And people who are able to stay at the park for an extended period of time, like the astronomers in residence, basically everybody who has been a resident has come back with that in their hearts is just that profundity that the canyon gives us through the rocks and through the stars. So it's a beautiful program, and I must say, Kevin, you did a fantastic job, and the amount of outreach you did was incredible, and you changed thousands of people's lives for the better. So
And,
we thank you so much for doing that.
and I think that's one person, spending a few weeks, a month. I was there a month. And you go to the Grand Canyon Star Party. You have 100 plus volunteers. You have how many people every night are going to the Star Party?
Yeah, 1,500, 1,700 a night. So it's a
And
big event.
in a week or 10 days of time, how many
Yeah,
people are seeing something or hearing about something or understanding something they never thought about, or maybe they did but
yeah,
didn't realize the depth of it. And that's what I love. Visitors coming to Lowell, or
yeah,
visitors going to Grand Canyon. I mean, one of my favorite things. I've worked in our public program for years, and I think I don't know. There's so many great experiences, but one of the most fun things is just standing out under the stars with people with laser pointer pointing stuff out and just
yeah,
hearing the gasps. Because I mean, looking through the telescope is phenomenal and inspiring. And when you do it, it's just you and whatever you're looking through. You can have hundreds of people around you, but when you're looking through that telescope, you're connected with that object. But just standing, at a sky that we all have looked at, but when you have somebody there to explain it a little bit, and it's just jaw dropping, what the
one of
reaction
my
will be.
one of my favorite things to do is and we've turned here to the ghost of Jupiter is as I'm as everything's said and done and Star Party is kind of rolling out and it's sort of doing its thing and there's not much else to be done from a logistical standpoint from my job. I sometimes just walk around the telescope lot, around the 50 to 60 telescopes that you have. And one of the funnest things is just like you said, to listen in to all the different conversations that are going on with astronomers and just excited people talking about the
Yeah.
Sombrero galaxy that we just saw a moment ago, or the Beehive cluster, or the ghost of Jupiter, or the Whirlpool galaxy, and or you'll walk through and you'll hear all these conversations, you'll hear the gasps, and then sometimes you'll just you'll flash your red light and you'll just see a whole pod of people just kind of staring in silence up at the Milky Way. And it's that experience I always try to do at least once or twice during the event, just to sort of imbibe in the transformative experiences that are going on at such
Yes.
a high frequency.
Down at Lowell Observatory, a couple of years back, we opened the Giovanni Open Deck Observatory, which is the state-of-the-art facility where the whole building rolls back and it opens the sky to 6 telescopes that are mounted, one of which Gavin is on right now. And when we opened that, I would, kind of outside of the footprint of the building where the telescopes are, there are benches. And when we opened, I would love sitting out there, and you'd hear, there's 6 different telescopes with educators pointing out different things. And then over here, there's one of the staff with laser pointer pointing out stuff in the sky. And then, over here is one of our astronomers talking about their research and looking at a monitor at the stuff that they study. And it's like an embarrassment of riches. And there's something for everybody. The Grand Canyon Star Party, like you're describing, is exactly that. You can look at so many things, and you could look at the same thing. Also, I like doing this too. Of several people might be looking at a planet if it's up, but each one of those operators has a different story to tell, or a different
Yes.
perspective on it. Or if you're pointing out constellations, we start talking about the different cultural interpretations. You can just listen all night, and you're going to keep hearing new things. So
Yes.
it's so much, it's such a blast, even if you just stand there and listen.
Speaking of looking at objects, what are we looking at here?
We have the ghost of Jupiter in there.
Yes.
That's a planetary nebula. These one of these many things in astronomy that, based on our understanding centuries ago, maybe that's some sort of planet or planetary planet in the formation. We know today that it's not a planet. That's a white dwarf star in the middle of it. It's sort of as stars go through their life stages, kind of their evolution, um, depending on their size and mass and everything. Some can go supernova. Our sun can't. Our sun isn't massive enough to be able to do that, but it's going to go through a series of expansions and contractions, become a red giant. Ultimately, it'll end up as a white dwarf, something the size of Earth that's really dense. And so these planetary nebulae, they like the Ring Nebula is another great example of this classic ring of gas. And if the telescope is strong enough, you can see that star, that white dwarf star in the middle. And so like I said before, you look at these objects and you can really, we haven't been looking, we've only been looking through telescopes for a couple hundred years, a few hundred years, but we understand how stars evolve because we can study them at different stages. We haven't seen a star go from birth to life to death,
Mhm.
but we can see them in different stages and piece it together by looking at this. And I think that's one of the fun things to hear at star parties, because you're looking at so many different objects. You get an understanding, even if you don't have to be a scientist, and it can be intimidating to people, like the math and the physics,
Right.
and that's above my head. You hear that all the time, but a lot of it's very technical, but you can get so much out of it. You don't have to understand how a star works to be able to say, wow, that's pretty cool to look at.
I always like that analogy of, for astronomers, and that, like you say, we can't sort of watch the whole evolution of a star, but if you imagine, aliens are coming to Earth and they only had one day to study the human being, they would look around and they would see an infant, and then a toddler, and then an adolescent, and they'd see a grown person, and then an elderly person, and you can kind of piece together the lifespan of a human being just by seeing us all in our different stages of life,
Right.
even
Yep.
if you only had one day. And that's kind of the same thing astronomers are doing in the night sky, looking at these stars at various stages of life and sort of putting that story together. And really, again, like northern Arizona just in general, Grand Canyon is it's one of the best places to see these distant objects and these stars in such pristine form. Uh, my understanding is that, at least for a while, Arizona had the largest collection of optical research telescopes, in the world, and there's reasons for that. I mean, Grand Canyon, for example, is, our geography just lends itself to dark skies. It is high and dry. We're at 7,000 feet on the south rim, 8,000 feet and above on the north rim in the dry desert Southwest. where there's not a lot of humidity in the air to affect the astronomical seeing. It's crisp, and so I like to always flag that even if light pollution weren't a thing, and all else were equal, and there was no light pollution in the United States, I mean, Grand Canyon, Flagstaff, these areas would still have a sharpness of starlight that is unparalleled because of the local geography, and like Arizona is in the Southwest. We got a lot of high mountain peaks. Half of this, a little bit under half the state is on the Colorado Plateau, so it is just a fantastic place to see these deep sky objects in their pristine form.
And, we think of, I was mentioning Lowell Observatory was founded in 1894, 18 years before Arizona was even a state. So we think about kind of the Wild West and, cowboys and railroad people and scientists. As part of the early culture. I mean, they were rubbing shoulders with them. It's part of who we are in Arizona. And it's that heritage goes back, and it really goes back. We're talking about, Euro time, European time here, but ancient cultures, they looked up at the skies. They had these pristine skies, and to be able to look at and see the same skies that they did in this dark way is you really feel connected. I like going out to like Wapaki, and standing there and imagining them looking up at the sky. It's the same thing that I'm looking at right now and what their interpretation was.
Yeah, I mean, there's really great. This whole region, the Southwest is also unparalleled when it comes to that deep archaeocultural ethno-astronomy. I mean, it's written into the very buildings, and still to this day alive in the cultures. And so, I really think in order to truly appreciate a sense of place is to understand how the indigenous peoples of this land use the landscape, almost as a palette to understand the workings of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and how, the night sky in turn, it reflects back down the landscape and the peoples. I mean, we place our local heritage in the stars, the plants, the animals, our gods, our ancestors, morals, warnings, all sorts of things. And so it's really as important, I think, to learn what is written in the indigenous skies as it is to learn the local geology or the ecology. I mean, if you really want to understand that deeper sense of place and heritage.
And I as a historian, I always look at heritage, and I love the history, but I like to think of how it's not just important as a historic footnote, but forms the foundation of what we know today. And one of these things I was going to mention before, we looked at the Sombrero Galaxy for a little bit, and the Sombrero Galaxy is one of these heritage things that I love. One is, what better place than Arizona to look at the Sombrero Galaxy, because it looks like a big sombrero, but also the heritage of science, because back in 1912, there was an astronomer in Flagstaff, Lowell Observatory, named Vestos Slier, and he was studying these fuzzy blobs in space. They were then called spiral nebulae, and the telescopes, you could look through the telescopes, and they were, they're a fuzzy blob, a small fuzzy blob. But he did something that nobody else had done. He took spectra, and he did this by putting a spectrograph which kind of captures the chemical elements in the object. But he did this by opening a telescope and doing exposures of 30 or 40 hours. He would set the telescope up, point it at the object that's real faint. Telescope, as the night goes on, moves across the sky a lot slower than I'm moving my hand. But he's looking through a guide scope the whole time for hours. When that object is low, he closes the lens cap. The next night, moves the telescope back on, opens it back up, continues the exposure. And by doing this, he was able to gather that very faint light, gather it enough to where he could determine not only the composition of these things, which was pretty straightforward, but also the relative motion based on the Doppler shift. And the sombrero was the first one he looked at that he noticed this thing is moving away from us. It's moving really fast away from us, in excess of 900 times the speed of sound. Nobody's ever recorded anything moving like that. What's it mean? And and come to find out that was the first time that anybody had detected that the universe is expanding. And it was, this heritage project right in our backyard here in Arizona. And there's so much of that here between the science and the culture. It's just part of who we are. And I think it's kind of fun on a lighter note, I talk about astronomy as part of who we are. Arizona has the 5 Cs historically: cattle, citrus, climate, copper, cotton. I think we need to add cosmos to that,
Ooh.
because it's such an important, not just it's studied here, but it's an important economic generator between research dollars, visitation, because astrotourism is big. Um, but also, on a light note, it's been a couple months ago that Representative Justin Wilmoth introduced a bill declaring Pluto as Arizona state planet. And
Aha.
and that went through, and Arizona is the first state to have its own state planet. And whether you call it a dwarf planet or a planet, whatever, it shows the importance of astronomy to Arizona. And I just love that. And
I love that. I love that too. I was about to comment that I hadn't heard that actually, and I was about to comment that I was jealous of Utah, our neighbor to the north, for having one of their state astronomical objects as the Beehive cluster, which I was always jealous, and I was like, Arizona needs something like that. But
yeah,
that's
now
super
we've
cool.
got it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
And
Wow.
I told you, Rader, when this started, this is going to fly by, and
Well,
I'm going to cut in and remind everybody of what we're talking about. And now we have 3 minutes left, and so we're going to wrap it up. But I think there's just so much to talk about, and it's all exciting. It's inspirational. You don't have to be a hardcore astronomy nerd to look at the sky or look through a telescope to really be inspired and to get chills by looking at these things. And so I really appreciate you joining us and sharing your vast knowledge and your experience in making the Grand Canyon such a destination, not only for daytime but nighttime. And Grand Canyon Star Party is one of the quintessential events for so many people around the world, because how do you beat it? You're the Grand Canyon, and at night you're looking at stars in really dark skies. How do you beat that? And so it's been great having you on, and this is just such a great partnership with Grand Canyon Conservancy, Grand Canyon National Park, and Lowell Observatory, and we're really excited to share it.
well, thank you all so much. It was an honor to be here, and that went by way too quick. But I hope to see you all up at Grand Canyon Star Party June 1st to the 8th this year, coming up really quick. Come up to me and say hello. I'll be in the theater, and I'll be walking around in the back telescope lots, and I'll be happy to talk with y'all. So please come by and say hi. And again, hopefully people apply for the Astronomer in Residence program as well. And if you guys have anything, always email me. I'm happy to answer anything you guys got.
Well, thanks, Rader, for joining us and your always inspiring words. I'd also like to thank our behind the scenes crew: Heather Craig, Gavin Moriarty on telescopes, Alex Albert, helping with all the behind the scenes things that make the computers work and the program runs, and Lauren Cisneros with the Grand Canyon Conservancy for all your great work. And congratulations, Lauren, on a personal front. I know there's some exciting news in your life, so we appreciate you spending time with us. And I wish we could see all these faces to say thank you, but we'll say thank you. And thanks everybody for joining us. If you can't tell, we're excited about this. Excited because we're not just astronomy nerds. It's just good, fun stuff. And I encourage everybody to go to the Grand Canyon Star Party, talk to Rader, go to Lowell Observatory, just go outside and look up at night and see the wonder of the universe. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on our next live stream with Grand Canyon National Park and Grand Canyon Conservancy.